Thank you, Laska Hirlock. And Minister, you're very welcome back into the Chamber today. I'm going to begin by saying that there is no great secret about my opposition to this bill, but much more than that, it is no secret that the vast majority of Ireland is opposed to this bill. We know this, of course, because the government's own public consultation was met with 73% of respondents opposing the government's plans to crack down on what can and cannot be said in this country without fear of prosecution. Most people would think that such overwhelming opposition to government plans would result in them being changed or scrapped, but most people haven't been paying attention. They do know that in 2023 the government knows best, and the uneducated Irish public must be led by the nose and taught what to think, lest their empty heads be filled with insidious far-right propaganda, such as maybe Ireland has an upper limit on how many tens of thousands of people it can import. As such, the government deigned to ignore the results of its consultation and ploughed ahead, making a profit out of the author of one submission which predicted, "It doesn't matter what anyone says, you do what you want regardless." The philosophy behind this bizarre behaviour is quite clearly that of an avowed nanny state. The members of our Cabinet and our senior civil servants do not view themselves as servants of the public at all, but rather enlightened and elevated individuals with a quasi-divine mandate to decide exactly how each and every Irish person lives their lives. In private recognition of their ability or in unwillingness to solve the real and pressing issues facing Ireland, housing and emigration, coincidentally issues of their own making, they instead busied themselves by micromanaging the day-to-day experiences of ordinary people, deciding what cars they're allowed to drive, what drinks they're allowed to buy, what fuels they're allowed to use, what their children learn in school, and now what ideas and opinions are allowed to be shared or what beliefs may be held or expressed in private. In this way, we see clearly the anarcho-tyranny described by Samuel Francis in the 90s, the combination of oppressive government power against the innocent and the law-abiding, and simultaneously a grotesque paralysis of the ability or the will to use that same power to carry out basic public duty, such as protection or public safety. This piece of proposed legislation is so broad in its scope and casts a prosecutorial net so wide that upon its passing no citizen will ever be entirely sure what they are free to say what they wish to. The law contained within it is so ambiguous and uncertain that one cannot but think that the intent is to create exactly this sort of hazy legal environment which forces individuals to err on the side of caution by self-censoring, as they will never know what utterance of theirs might be reported as hateful. Most laws is painstakingly drafted so as to isolate specific actions and single them out for criminal prosecution, taking great care not to mistakenly punish benign activities. This law does almost the opposite. It is hard to view the goal of this legislation as anything but the perusal of a nationwide chilling effect on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. If the government wanted a legal basis to use its monopoly on force to punish anyone who would speak out against a prevailing narrative, it's hard to imagine what it would do differently to this. In recent times, the government has become fond of playing the card of, sorry, our hands are tied, we have to do X because of the EU, a ready-made excuse to wriggle out of accountability for everything from immigration to energy taxes. However, in these circumstances, the Council of European Union's Council Framework Decision 2008-915 GHA doesn't go nearly as far as the Irish Government has with this bill, with the Council decision only targeting certain forms of expression of blatant racism and xenophobia. It was this government that decided to add in a nonsensical circular definition of gender and to choose not list sex as a protected characteristic in favour of meaningless phrase sex characteristics. This is just the tip of the iceberg of bad law that comprises this legislation. I have over 80 amendments drafted to try and put any semblance of sanity and respect for civil rights into this bill. The definition of hatred is circular. The definition of gender is nonsensical word salad. The very premise of the bill is that some persons are worthy of protections and others are not, hence the exclusive list of protected characteristics. If you happen to be hated for something to do with your person that's not on the list, you're fresh out of luck. The characteristics for which you're being persecuted isn't in vogue. Various sections of the bill rely heavily on the legal friction of the reasonable person, which is all but useless as an aid to the courts when it comes to controversial social issues upon which reasonable people diverge. The lower threshold of recklessness instead of intent in Section 7 places an entirely undue onus on a person to rack their brains as to how anyone, could possibly maybe interpret their speech as being likely to incite violence before anything is said. Section 9 establishes that in order to be put into jail for having incited violence, you don't actually have to have incited any violence. This is clown world stuff. The law is there to protect people. What we have here is a draconian legislation which can put you in jail where not one single person has been harmed or victimised. Some people who you think you are protecting have highlighted the dangers of this legislation, including many gays and lesbian groups. I note not all gays have been in touch with every single senator in this House. Section 9 and 10 both contain provisions reversing the burden of proof in placing it on the defendant to prove that it didn't intend to communicate the material of public or a section of the public and didn't possess material with a view of such material being communicated, respectively. Section 10 criminalises the preparation or possession of material that is likely to incite violence or hatred against a person because of the protected characteristics, with a view of the material being communicated to the public or a section of the public, even where the material has not been published. Section 10(3) goes on to state that where it is reasonable to assume that the material was not intended for the personal use of the person, that person would be considered to be guilty unless they can prove their innocence. This reverses the burden of proof and interferes with our rights of innocent until proven guilty. And so, merely possessing private material which you find interesting, engaging, intellectually stimulating, this may be a criminal act if some hypothetical person were to find such material hateful. Section 11 contains the most pathetic afterthought of a defence of freedom expression I've ever seen and is entirely unfit for purpose. The irony is that in the Dáil, Deputy Paul Murphy tried to enshrine the protection of Article 10 of the ECHR into this section, the EU's own protections, and was voted down. So our government has the gall to throw up its hands and say, oh whoa, the EU is making us pass this, our hands are tied, and then vote against the inclusion of the EU's own protection for free speech. It really does show a staggering contempt for the rule of law and the intelligence of the Irish people. Section 14 establishes that the DPP had absolute discretion when it comes to which cases to pursue where a contravention of the Act has taken place. Obviously, there won't be enough members of An Garda Síochána to carry out all the arrests that would be necessary under this Act if it had to be enforced at all in all times. So the DPP can pick and choose who to make an example of. Section 15 covers search warrants. Section 15(1), if a judge of the District Court has satisfied the information on a note of a member that there are reasonable grounds for suspecting the evidence or relating to the commission of an offence under 7, 8 and 10 is to be found in any place, the judge may issue a warrant for the search of that place and any person found at that place. Any member of An Garda Síochána, in the Offences Against the State Act 1939, it has to be a judgment call of the officer of An Garda Síochána not below the rank of Chief Superintendent. Now it can be just any member. Obviously, this is to expedite the process. Upon such evidence being given and a warrant granted, the guards can enter your home, search every person there, seize every single electronic device in the house, your phones, your laptops, tablets, those of your partner, your children's phones. Actually, they can take anything, diaries, books, any object at all, and hold them for an indefinite amount of time. No time limit at all on that. But it gets better. They can sit you down at your computer and force you to log on and compel you to give them any or all of your passwords. And if you refuse, that in itself is a crime, up to a year in jail for not willingly handing over your personal information to the state, even where no crime is being committed and you've done nothing wrong. Laws such as this have to be used in other jurisdictions to attack journalism, political opponents. Imagine all of your devices being seized mid-election, only to be returned 3 years down the line with a quick, sorry, you weren't doing anything illegal after all. This really is dreadful law, and I do genuinely think that you're pushing it too far, Minister. The Irish people will forbear a lot, but you really are pushing it here. And I do believe that you're forcing this law through against the will of the people is an act that will be paid for at the next election. And then your political opponents will have this legislation to use against whom they will. Now that's food for thought. There's going to be a lot of talk from the government groups on this bill about how we all have to band together to stop dreadful hatred that's out there, and how hate speech leads to hate attacks or an attack in itself. This is a silencing bill. It's a censorship bill. It's a bill made by the powerful to stamp out the dissent of minority voices. It's a bill that seeks to codify the prevailing narratives and restricts the free exchange of ideas, insulating the status quo against criticism. I will be opposing the bill, along with anyone who believes in civil rights, inalienable freedoms and the just rule of law. The voting records will show that today. So be brave, Senator. Speak up. Thank you, Chair, for your lenience.
And the next